evening, gents. It's the Don, Rob, and John show. That's what I'm going to call it from now on. I don't know where Brian is. He said he was going to be here, so but he's not here. He's probably doing something really important. So today I thought about showing you guys something that I recently had to use, but it's also a new feature that Microsoft just added in. And let me know when you can see the desktop, my desktop. I just want to make sure you guys can see it.
I can see it, sir.
All right, perfect. So I just wrote a blog post about Microsoft's new compliance manager, and I thought, well, this is kind of good because we were talking about auditing and also talking about cloud, and this is both together. So one of the things as an auditor that I have a hard time with when I talk to clients is I say, hey, are you doing all these security things, right? That's my job. I go in there and say, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're doing. What's the difference? And they come up with a report and tell them what they're doing wrong, or what they're doing right, and it's not like you're, as an auditor, you're trying to find them and say, oh, you're doing all this stuff wrong. You're trying to help them to better improve their systems, right, and the security posture of their systems. So one of the cool things, or one of the difficulties that I have with some clients is I say, hey, do you have a cloud service? Most clients will then assume, oh, all the security is being handled by the cloud service, right? And that they don't need to do anything. I even was at an RSA conference where high-level people from a federal government agency that will remain anonymous, but I'm sure if you go back to the RSA conference, you can probably find, if they recorded it, who said it. They were talking about, we're going to use this Google Cloud for the federal government. We're going to put all this information in there. And he said, we only have to add 2 controls to the controls they already have in place in order for us to follow NIST guidelines, the risk management framework that the federal government is required to follow. And I was flabbergasted at the statement, because as an auditor, I know that's not true. There's a lot more than 2. There's not just 2 controls. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was just like, oh my gosh. So I had a hard time with that. So one of the things that I have with clients now is I still get that perception that, the cloud service provider is taking care of everything as far as security goes. All I need to do is set up the passwords and that's it, right? So Microsoft came up with this compliance manager that I think is the bee's knees. I don't know what the best way to say it, but I think it's a really cool thing that Microsoft has added, and it's a free product that they add if you have a subscription to the Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Office 365, or the Microsoft Dynamics 365, slipping me. So I wanted to show you what it is. So if you go to the compliance manager, and I went too far on this. Let me go back because I'm stealing all my thunder. So, anyways, let me go back here. You start off on this page, then you say Launch Compliant Manager, and then you get to this page. I'm sorry, that's a little bit backwards. Anyways.
That's okay. I have a question.
Yeah.
So with the Compliance Manager, is this something that an organization must subscribe to, or is it already part of their subscription, whether it's through Azure Office 365 or Dynamics? So meaning, like, if you already have a subscription, is this included as part of that subscription, or do you have to then purchase the license for Compliance Manager?
No, that's the good news. The good news is it's there, and all you have to do is log into it. One piece of bad news is, well, it's not bad news at all. It's just free. If you have Office 365 tenant, Azure tenant, or a Dynamics 365 tenant, you have this. It's there. You just have to log into it. First time you log into it, it'll say, hey, let me give you a little tour of it. I'm going to show you a little tour now that's going to be a little bit more interactive than what they did. But it just shows you basically the basics of it, and then you go from there. So this is free, and it comes with just whatever subscription you have. And I think that that's really good, because this is one thing I have to say for Microsoft, because there's a lot of other companies out there, and if you're dealing with a smaller cloud company that is dealing with a niche product, like if you're dealing with financial applications, it's a kind of a niche market. Not everybody has cloud versions of financial things. They don't always tell you what they're doing. In fact, sometimes even as an auditor, when I go to a cloud service provider for one of my clients and I say, hey, I want to see, your latest SSAE 16, which is their audit report on compliance, they'll say, oh, you need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You got to jump through all these hoops to get a copy of their audit report. Microsoft is actually integrated their audit reports with this. I can show you where you can get Microsoft audit reports. It's just in the Compliance Center under like Office 365, and all of them will be listed there. And you can actually see. I think last year's was done by Deloitte, and the report from Deloitte is there. Microsoft is transparent in this, and I think that this is what we need for security. One, I want to know what they're doing on their side to protect my data, and two, what do I need to do? And the question about what I need to do for my tenant has not been answered until now. And now with this, Microsoft has started off with, and I really appreciate this. I think this is, and I don't work for Microsoft, so I don't get any money for this, and it's a free thing. So, but it's really cool. So if you look at this, you have different things listed here, depending upon what you have. And if I had Dynamics or something like that, that should show up in here. They have Office 365 for GDPR, which is the new European standard for the general data protection requirements that organizations have. Then they have Office 365 for NIST 853, which is what the federal government uses and what I would recommend most organizations use as a framework for security. The reason why I recommend it over ISO 27001 is because they're pretty much comparable with one another, and NIST is free. You don't have to pay for it. ISO, in order to get the documents, you have to pay for them. And there's not a substantial difference. In other words, there's not a material difference in the control catalogs. So you could pick either one. It's like 6 of one, half a dozen of another. So you might as well go with the free one. You might as well go with the one that the federal government's using and the one the federal government's recommending here in the United States, and it's free. And then you can see that Azure ISO is listed here as well. This particular tenant, this is a brand new tenant, so I don't have anything set up in this tenant. It's kind of just blank. This is what you would see when you first got in. What I want to show you, though, let's go into one of these assessments. You don't have to do all of these assessments, right? Because if you wouldn't do NIST 853 and ISO 27001, I don't see why you would do both. Because NIST probably has a few more controls, but I don't know that there's a need to go into both of them. So let's just go into the NIST. Now, GDPR, you may want to do that with the NIST one, especially if you had European client data inside of your cloud solution, in which case you'd want to go over that. In addition to the 853, because those are different. Those are almost completely different as far as security controls. One's more privacy, one's more security. So when I enter the control, when I enter it here, you can see it says, hey, here's Office 365, 853. Here's the assessed controls. 78% of them are assessed. Here's the status that it's in progress. It tells you last time it's modified. And then you also have a compliance score. Now, the compliance score is made up of the activities that Microsoft has done and the activities that you have done. So if you just take a look at this, and here's the warning that I talked about earlier. It says, hey, basically everybody in your organization has access to this by default, so you may need to set up whatever security in there that you want to do. You see they've divided up into Office 365 in-scope cloud services, Microsoft managed controls, and customer managed controls. This is the part that I was talking about where people don't understand, okay, what's my responsibility and what is Microsoft's responsibility as far as taking care of and protecting my systems and the data on my systems. So Microsoft is kind of broken it out so that you know exactly what you're responsible for and exactly what Microsoft's doing. And as an auditor, I love this because I can look at it and I can see who's doing it. And if a customer came back to me and said, I don't think that this is our responsibility, I think this is Microsoft's responsibility, then we can kind of look at it and see. But I think that this is a great place to start. The first thing is when you open up Office 365 in-scope services, it's telling you everything that's a part of this assessment. So this assessment that's been done, on the Microsoft side of things, what did it include? So if you have Office 365, Exchange Online, and it's telling you what versions you have and basically all the stuff that you have in your subscription and what's in there. So Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, Project Online, SharePoint Online, Skype Online, Azure Active Directory, because that would be a part of it when you get to Office 365 tenant. And then if you had Access Online, which is their database thing, that would be included as well as your Office Online tools, and Delve if you're using something like that. So all of that's a part of this assessment. So they're giving you the scope, which is the first thing you'd want to know. Now this first part is all this controls that Microsoft has that they say we're responsible for and we've been working on. So if I look at the assess controls under access controls, and this is, by the way, following NIST 853 guidelines. So each one of those things is a control in 853. And if you take a look at this, the control ID AC1A, AC1 is access control 1, which is the first control. And if you're familiar with NIST 853, you'd recognize that right away as the control, and then subcontrols to it as well. So they basically say, hey, in this particular one, because all the number ones of controls, AC1, each of the family of controls, the first control is almost always, do you have a policy and procedure for this? So Microsoft has a policy and procedure about access controls, but you'll see that there's a part that you would have to take care of as well as the customer, because you're going to have to manage setting up access controls on your side for your tenant that you're using. So this one tells you the compliance score. Is the controls implemented? Yes. What was the test date? So in September of 2007 it was done, and it was done by a third-party independent auditor, and they passed. And if you click on more, you can get more information. Let me scroll down now to get you the more information. It tells you the implementation details. So how did they implement this control? Here it is. Here's how they plan to do the testing, and if management had a response, in other words, Microsoft responding back to the auditors saying, hey, the auditors said this, but we think that we're meeting the spirit of the control because we've done X, that would go into that area. You don't see that whole much, because if you see a lot of that, then it's usually a red flag that management doesn't agree with the auditor on everything. That's a problem. So if it's one or two things, that's probably fine. So they're giving you all of this information about the control, whether it was tested. They don't tell you necessarily who tested this particular control and all that. But the audit report is available in another location, which we can cover at a later time. But I just wanted to show you this part right here. So now that you get an idea of the Microsoft controls, let me close this up. And it goes through all the controls. And there's 85 in here that are controls that are tested. And I don't want to have to scroll through all of them because it should shrink up. You can see the compliance scores different on each of the different ones. You can see this one is one that Microsoft test result that didn't pass. And we can look at more under that one. Unless this is freezing on me. Don't freeze on me. There we go. So the test plan details were to examine the Office 365 multi-tenant system security plan. They have it set for 10 failed attempts in 15 minutes rather than the FedRAMP value of 3 failed attempts in 15 minutes. And so the management response from Microsoft is the FedRAMP organization defined values require accounts to be locked after 3 failed attempts within 15 minutes. Workload threat modeling indicates that the risk of denial of service that negatively affects system availability. So what Microsoft is saying, hey, if we did that, it would be really easy for somebody to lock out systems, which would be a way of doing a denial of service attack. And so Microsoft is saying that we feel 10 is more in line with it. So that gives you kind of an idea. You know exactly what's going on as far as what Microsoft's done for the controls. So let me go down here to, because that didn't shrink. I don't know why that didn't shrink. That's all theirs. Now this goes to customer managed controls. So if I go into customer managed controls and we go to access control here, Let's open that up and see what we got. This is the controls that I, as the tenant owner or the one using the cloud service, these are the ones that I'm responsible for making sure get done. Now, notice I said that AC1 would also be on my side, that I would need to do it. And the reason why would be because they have to have access control policies and I have to have access control policies. So here's my access control policy. You got your client's compliance score there as well. Here, I'll click on more so you can just see all the stuff that's available under there as well. Same type of thing there. One additional thing is, by the way, if you don't understand the controls, you can go look up AC1 in NIST Special Publication 853, and you get the whole long thing. Some of the controls are a page long just in the verbiage and what is required for them. So sometimes just a title can be misleading as to what is required. So I recommend that you take a look at that. I don't know why these things are not opening. Oh, there it is. So this one says customer actions. It's telling you what you need to do as customer actions. If I hit read more, it'll pop it up on the side of the screen. If I am clicking it. I think my mouse is not working or something's not happening. There it is. And then over here on the side, you can see where the customer actions gets more in detail with all the stuff that's necessary and required. Yeah, I got a lag on this thing. I don't know why. Hey, this is a great tool. Look, it sucks. It's really slow. And when I click things, it doesn't work. Oh, I shouldn't say that. Everybody's going to get mad at me now.
So I've been trying to log in.
I'm just going to re-log into it and refresh the page. I don't know why it was doing that.
So I've been trying to log in on mine to under my subscription to see what it looks like. And every time I try to launch the application manager, it says, you have selected a free but protected resource. You must sign in. So I go to sign in, I authenticate, and it comes back and tells me that the application failed to load, something or other.
Interesting.
So I've been scouring while you're doing that the feedback from the site, and apparently it's just a hiccup with the browser that I've selected to use, and the solution is to log out of anything that is tied to Microsoft's cloud. So
oh yeah, because
right. So if you're logged into anything, including Outlook, then it kind of freaks it out. It says.
Yes, I've noticed that because I have Office 365. I have like 6 or 7 tenants because I either have it for clients or I have one personally and I have one for my job, and I'm on a nonprofit and it has Office 365 tenant. And because of that, my thing is always wigging out because it doesn't know which tenant I'm in. Because I have to use different browsers sometimes because this is a domain joined machine that I'm on. It tries to log into the other one, and I'm trying to log into a test tenant that I have rather than the one that I actually have in production. Anyways, so getting back to this, the controls are here. You click on more, and then you can get up to the point where you can get the whole information of the controls. Right here, it's telling you also some other related controls. ISO control. A9.1.1 covers the same type of thing. HIPAA control, and then NIST 800-171 provides more guidance on this, and so you can get more information from there. You can upload documents that are evidence that this is done. So as an auditor, I love this. So if a client came out to do an audit and they said, here, you can just log into our cloud tenant, and you can look at all the results, and then I could see there, and then I could look at, what did they do for a test and see what happened. The nice thing here is I can assign this to a user and assign a user to go out and do the assessment on this control. In other words, somebody in our organization would go do a self-assessment and then determine whether or not this control is in place. I can set the implementation date. So when did I implement this? And then I can put down what the test date is and then what the test result is. So another person could log in, whoever was assigned to this, and say, okay, and I like how they have this. I like implemented, not implemented. I like as a good way. I normally do in place, not in place, partially in place, which they don't have here. Not applicable or risk accepted, and they don't have risk accepted in here, and they don't have because that's something that you could do, and they don't have partially in place. Not that partially in place, like as an auditor, I don't give them like extra. I don't say, oh, you got the control in place. No, it's either in place or it's not in place, and so I'll mark it as not in place. But I tell them that it's partially in place because they're doing part of it. Because I want them to understand that they've made some progress, that they're not at a complete zero. You know what I mean? Like more of a maturity level.
Right. Now, I have a question for you. So going back one under the assigned user and managed document section, you said that you could log in. You could go to a client, for example, or customer site, and they could say, "Well, here, log into our site." Would they be giving you an account that then has access into their subscription, or is there a methodology in which you can use your own credentials from your own subscription to then view just reports?
That's a good question. I do not know, and I'd have to find out if they allow for like some type of federation where then they can allow somebody into it, or typically what happens if I've gone out to a client and I say, hey, I need to see a system, they typically give me a read-only access account or something along those lines, or they have an account that's already established that's not assigned to me it's assigned to me for a period of time, but maybe it's auditor user 1 or something like that, and they just turn it on and turn it off as needed.
Sure. I was just thinking, kind of posing that question just for the sake of everybody who may be watching this in the future to understand that some organizations may just give you, like you said, a temporary read-only type of an account. Because again, you would have to make sure that there was follow-up on, when you were, as an example, if you go in as an auditor and they give you this account for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks or, how many ever days, that there's a control in place that then, like, zeroes out the password, if you will. Like, it automatically at that date will go in and, change that password. And if there isn't an automated process, then, that has to be, again, going back to auditing and the controls, that has to be, brought to somebody's attention that has to happen, or else, even though you're an auditor and you signed NDAs and, a scope of work and everything else, it just seems to me that can be something that is, can be routinely overlooked.
Right. I agree. So anyways, this gets part of what you just said kind of keyed in on one part that I think is also really neat about this. The other part too is you can take this report and export it to Excel. So I can go here and then I can hit save as, and I already have it downloaded, so I'm just going to switch over to it. And then this is what you end up getting downloaded. It says Microsoft Managed and Customer Managed. And here, if you take a look at it, we still have the control, we have the title, and of course it's in Excel, so it's not the nicest format, but it's in Excel, so in theory you can dump this into a database if you wanted to put it into your own database. Whether or not you could import this directly into another GRC product that you may be using, and GRC products are governance, risk, and compliance dashboards that help you with compliance. They're much like this Microsoft thing that they give you for free, but you typically host them internally, or maybe it's on the cloud that you host it, but then it helps you track your internal compliance activities and risk activities and how are you managing risk. But if you don't have a GRC, guess what? Download this Excel sheet and you got a good start. Right? So you can always take out the Microsoft managed things and customer managed things and combine them into one and say, here's your new GRC. It's in Excel, but at least it gives you a poor man's way, so to speak, of doing a GRC. Unless you can get into a database or set up a SharePoint site that can kind of give you the dashboard for it. Anyways, so again, here's the title, the description of the control, the compliance floor, the status, what happened, what were the implementation details, the test plan, and any management response. So that, and they go through all of the controls. So we can zoom all the way through the controls, and you can see that when we talk about NIST, there's quite a few controls. So we're all the way up to 814 of them. So the good part is Microsoft's taking care of those 815. This is what you have to take care of. And again, if you take a look at how much your organization has to do on the Microsoft side, there's headings in here, so it's not exactly 814, but you only have 245. So there's a big difference that you have to do. But going back up to the top, like we said, you have the control, customer actions, then you have the title, the description, the compliance score. I don't know why the description is so small and the compliance score is so big. I don't know why they do things the way they do them. The related controls, so if you want to crosswalk these to other things, you can crosswalk it to other things. If you had put in implementation status or an implementation date, a test date, test results, implementation details, and management responses, they would all be in here ready for you. So this kind of gives you plus any documents you have. So this Excel sheet, if you had all that stuff in there, would download and give you all of that same information. So if you needed to take it offline, you could do it. If an auditor like me comes to you and says, hey, what are you doing for compliance with the cloud service that you have, you could just download this thing and say, here's our current status. And that's what you would want to do. You would want to leave it, I would assume, in the Microsoft console. Keep your updated status on a regular basis. I would recommend, as good practice, and Microsoft doesn't have this in here, they don't have a scheduling. Somebody has to manually go in and schedule all of this. But normal practice is once every 3 years, you should have an external assessor come in and assess your systems. That, with the independence, gives management assurance that the controls are in place, operating intended, and produce the desired outcome. And they're not just taking IT's word for it. Because typically, IT, if they're doing the self-assessments, that's like, I'm testing my own work. Well, if I'm testing my own work, I usually, I give myself, the widest berth of, yes, I'm doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
So what we do recommend internally is that organizations, they would do 1/3 of the controls each year. So pick 1/3 of these controls, and I wouldn't go through just all the access control ones. Pick 1/3 of them and go through them once a year. You could do that as you can have a 2-week period and say, okay, staff, the first 2 weeks in March, we're going to go through 1/3 of these controls, and we're going to assign all these controls to people, go out and test these things, or maybe we just have internal auditors who get assigned to do it. However your organization is set up, however they want to do it. Then on a 3-year cycle, you would have gone through a self-assessment as the client of the controls that you're responsible for, and then the assessor can come by, and then they're just validating that your assessments are true, and that you know what I mean? They're validating that your assessments are true, but they're also testing the controls to see if those controls are the way they're supposed to be. That gives management the highest level of assurance. IT should not have any surprises, right? Because if they're doing their assessments and they know what their system is, there shouldn't be any surprises when the auditor comes. And that's one thing that always kind of gets me as an auditor when I show up and they're like, I didn't realize that this was a problem. Why wouldn't you? I mean, these are industry standards. It's not like I'm inventing something out of the ether or anything like that. So this gives you an idea of the compliance manager. And again, for each one of these, if I go back to the dashboard, if I can, it seems to get stuck, and then I have to refresh it. And I think what might be the issue is Edge, because I don't think I have the same problems when I was using Internet Explorer. And so if you look at GDRP, If your organization has it, again, it talks about what things are in scope for it. You can see quite a few more things. Where could customer data be? And so they're listing all of that. And then you can see the Microsoft managed controls, and you can see which ones that Microsoft has done, and what they've done and whether they've passed it and all this stuff. And for those of you that are using GDRP and you have that coming up, because it's coming due in May of 2018, which is just right around the corner, organizations are going to have to be dealing with this.
Yeah, we have, our university has 4 gateway campuses now. So we just opened one up in Mexico, at the University of Mexico, Mexico City. We have one in China, Beijing. We have one in India, and we have one in downtown Berlin.
So you are going to fall under the European Union.
Oh, yeah. They're already freaking out they've been freaking out for the last, as soon as they released the GDPR, the regulation itself and the implementation date, they have been going kind of bonkers because there's like 22,000 square foot facility that has, students, faculty, staff, the whole 9 yards are sitting there that work for IU, but they're sitting in downtown Berlin.
Yeah. Yeah, the cloud, just the way, the world's becoming really flat, not in the physical sense, but just in the information sense that, we can get information from anywhere in the world at any point in time, and it's just increasing. Like you're having a school, Indiana University is now in like 4 other countries. You know what I mean? That's like a big deal. You're on you're not on every continent, but you're working in that direction. Anyway, with that expansion, of course, there's going to be more controls you have to be concerned about. And if you have EU client information in your systems, you're going to have to take care of the GDRP requirements, and this is basically what those are. So if you're not familiar with what the requirements are, guess what? Here they are. For free. You can export it to Excel, and you have a checklist that you can go off as well. If you have other systems and other cloud service providers, by the way, just as a hint, you could take this same Excel sheet to them and say on the Microsoft managed controls, and then ask your current auditors or your current cloud service providers, because I think Microsoft did a pretty good job from my cursory review here of what they thought was client responsibilities and their responsibilities. Every service provider is going to be different, and so you may have to reevaluate each controls, but this is a good place to start with. So I'd recommend that you would download this to an Excel sheet, and then for your cloud service providers, look at all the controls in there and see if they make sense, and then get their audit report that they've had done, and then compare that and see where it all lines up, and then see where the gaps are. And then you may have to go back to them and say, hey, I noticed in this gap that you're not doing this under GDRP, and this is something that we as the tenant can't do. Maybe it's physical security or something, right? Because physical security is going to be wherever the data center is hosted, right? So you may go back to them and say, hey, your SSA 16 doesn't match up with this. What are you doing about it? And that's something that I think that I should probably bring up right now. SSA 16s, like a SOC 1 and 2, like from the SAS 70 days, those are just, they don't follow necessarily a particular standard unless you've adopted a standard. So basically, when an auditor comes in, they say, what do you say you're doing? And you will say, we change passwords every 120 years. They're going to test to see whether or not you change your passwords every 128 years. And if you do, you pass. So and that I'm using a huge example there, obviously that's ridiculous. But the point is that the SSA 16 is only going to say what the management says that they're doing, and if they're doing what they say they're doing. It's not going to tell you that they're following a standard unless they've adopted a standard and asked the auditors to assess them against a standard. So you would still have to do the crosswalk here with the SSA 16 and see if it goes and lines up with NIST. And because every one of them can be kind of different, it's kind of a nightmare. But it gives you a place to start. So I want to go back to the compliance manager. On the blog post that I posted, we got some things that show you each one of the aspects of it, as well as if you go back to the Service Trust portal, which I have to go, which I have to go back to. Let me go back here. If you go all the way to the bottom of it, you're going to see a bunch of other things. You're going to see Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, Office 365 Secure Code, Azure Security Center, and Enterprise Mobility and Security. And I want to just finish up with the compliance thing and see what you guys, John and Rob, what your thoughts are on the compliance manager aspect. Then for our next session, we'll talk about those other tools. Do you guys have any comments? You like it, hate it, love it?
I think it's really good. Like you said, if anything, if nothing else, for some organizations that may not have contracted out to a third-party auditor to come in and verify anything yet, or even if they're just starting off and they have absolutely no idea where or what to start or what to do, this is a great utility and a tool to showcase, look, if you have stuff that is up in Azure right now, or Office 365 or Dynamics, the provider is doing this level. Here are the things that you need to do. And for some medium-sized organizations who do not have a dedicated security staff, they'll be like, this is great. I now have a starting point. I can now take this information and I can go to, let's say, the board and say, look, we have to get funding to cover all of this stuff, and here are the priorities. So GDPR has to be mandated by, the middle of May, let's say, or the end of May. That's a high priority item. We need funding for it. And I'll give you an example of that. I taught a security class August last year, and one of my students in that class happens to be the senior, for lack of a better term, he was the senior system administrator for a very small private college that was getting federal funds. Don't ask me how, but this is all wrapped up into it. As part of this, the government mandated sometime last year that I think it was by the start of fall of 2018, all academic institutions must have an appointed CISO on the books for that particular institution if they would like to continue to get federal funding and grants. So this poor guy was in learning about security from the ground level. Like, he was switching job roles from being a system admin to now being a security person, and he was asking for tips and advice, and I was like, well, there's a couple of components of security. There's all the controls that you need to implement and monitor, and then there's the policies to help with the controls. I said, and then there's the auditing side that you're going to have to go. And he's like, oh, well, their expectation is that I do it all. And I said, you can't. It's impossible for you to do all of those. I said, you can implement all of those things, but you're going to need an outside source to come in and audit that what you're doing matches the policies that you have defined. And he's like, but we don't have any policies.
I
Right?
I get similar type of things. Like, I had a client call me and said, hey, can you come and do an audit for us? And I'm like, well, are you using NIST? Are you using what? No, we don't know what we haven't used anything. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do an audit for? I mean, that's a waste of money. You want me to come in and tell you you're not doing anything? Well, we just want to see kind of where we're at. Well, as opposed to what? What standard do you want to follow, right? And so I always tell my clients use NIST because most of my clients are local governments, and it's recommended for local governments. Nothing else is recommended for them. That's what's recommended for them. Therefore, it's industry standard. Therefore, it's due diligence and due care. It should be, that's what you should be doing. And if you don't know that that's what you should be doing, then just when think of it this way: as a system admin, one day are you willing to sit on the witness stand to say, yeah, we don't follow industry best practices?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to say, yeah, we had that breach and we're not following industry best practices. I mean, so if you're willing to do that, then fine, do whatever you want. But you have to think of it this way as a professional. And if you're going to be a professional in IT and not just a hack, but you're going to be a professional, you got to know these things. You got to know what the standards are. And you got to know how to follow them. And there's tools out there to help you, like this compliance manager, that can really help. And like you said, Rob, a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions because they don't have the security training. We already know that this is a problem because there's not enough people that have the training for it. We have to work on that. We have to get people up to that level so that they can produce or have the knowledge, skills, and abilities related to cybersecurity enough that they can then perform the job roles that are required of them. But one of the things that everybody should know, and maybe everybody doesn't know that, is that if you're having an audit or a security control assessment, it should be independent. And what does independent mean? The people that do test the controls are not the people who implement the controls. Who implements the controls? The IT staff.
Yep.
And you get people like this. You think you're really smart, and you're going to go, "Oh, I got it. I get around the auditor. I'll assess your controls, and you assess mine." Well, that doesn't work either, right? Because then he's going to go soft on you because you're going to go soft on him, right? So there's no level of assurance there. That's not truly independent. It should not be in the same department or in the same reporting structure. So typically you'd have the CIO, and then underneath the CIO you would have your various other directors, director of applications, maybe director of networking, director of system admins or whatever, and then your system admins and your folks down there that are doing the day-to-day jobs. They're the ones implementing the controls. Then you should have your CISO, and CISO is faster and faster becoming either a peer of the CIO or above the CIO. It used to be a lot of organizations that make them report to the CIO, but with all the privacy and requirements, it's now becoming a legitimate C-level executive, and it's kind of being pushed up and sometimes above the CIO to make sure that compliance and security and privacy and all those requirements are adhered to. It's difficult to make the CIO, who is your boss, follow compliance. From the business standpoint, a lot of people just say, hey, I want the system to be up and available and running, and I don't care about the security. That's where that conflict comes in, and that's why the CIO and CISO have sometimes competing, I don't want to say agendas, but they have competing goals that they want to make. And that's something that has to be hashed out. At sometimes, not everything has to be hashed out at the C level, but some things may have to be hashed out at the C level. And it's better if they're peers, or the safest way, having the CISO being the one that makes the final decision and says, no, we're not doing that because that's not appropriate for whatever privacy or compliance reasons. John, did you have anything?
I'm just kind of taking this all in. I mean, this is from our market sector. This is something that we don't see a lot of. You know, small business Midwest. Very valuable tool, though. This is awesome. Very impressed.
I do have one more question for you.
Shoot.
So currently, this is its own portal, right?
Right.
You have to go to the service trust to Microsoft, right?
Right.
Even though it's tied into the dominant three cloud platforms that they have currently, right?
Right.
Will there be a integration of this functionality, or at least a mechanism in which we can go from being logged in as a subscription admin? Let's say I log into my subscription in Azure, right? So I have my main subscription. I see everything that's running. There is currently a security center listed there. Do you think in the future that they would tie that in as a mechanism to get at least launched over to this side directly from the portal itself? Or do you think that from a like you mentioned it before, right? Like a clear separation between those two items, like the CIO and the CISO, for example, or the implementers versus the auditors. Do you think it's better to have this as a completely separate, standalone location that, even though I'm the admin of like a cloud solution, let's say Office 365, as your example earlier, that I would still have to go to a different site to go see our auditing and compliance component as opposed to directly from within the portal?
Well, yeah, I see where you're coming with it. I don't know that necessarily it's that big of a deal because, and I don't know what Microsoft's going to do. I don't know what their plans are with it. They not beta tested, but they put it out to first adopters or whatever in last November, and I think last week, end of February, beginning of March, is when they released it and sent out a notice that it's available generally now. And what I liked about it was because I had to go to different places and try to remember where all these different places were for the security that I'd already been playing with, like the Azure Security Center and the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. From those areas, I believe that you can get back here, and from here on this page, you can get to those. So I think it's not quite integrated. And I don't know if it's going to be, but I can see that it's already kind of moving in that direction. So I would say I think, and I hope that they do, to make it so that it's a little bit easier. So that if I'm in the Azure, it's just going to show it there, and then if I'm in the Office 365, it shows it there. So it's showing it in three different places, or four different places, whatever it is. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Trainers Underground. If you have any requests for future episodes, please go to our website, www.learnsecurity.org, and fill out the comment section. If you found this video informative, please like below. We would greatly appreciate that. If you would like to catch a future episode, just follow this channel or find it on our website, www.learnsecurity.org. If you have any comments about today's episode, please comment below. Again, thank you so much. And remember, stay safe and secure.